Good to go?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Delicate operation.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me to your club this evening, and yes, what a great turnout. Thanks for giving up your lovely evening outside to be inside and talking about nature. And as Jeff said, I work with the New Brunswick Chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, and this evening I'm going to speak to you about some of the conservation work that our organization is doing on the Isthmus. So I'll go through some slides highlighting how the Chignecto Isthmus is a priority place for conservation, and how creating networks of areas that are conserved through local land use planning, as well as private land stewardship, can make it easier for plants and wildlife to be resilient and thrive into the future. And I do look forward to some discussion with you at the end. And how am I doing for voice levels? Should I speak a bit more? Okay, good. So those of you not familiar with Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, we're Canada's only nationwide charity that's solely dedicated to the protection of public land, or crown land, and fresh water and ocean. And we have a strong national and regional presence across the country. So we're really focused on conserving nature to respond to this dual crisis that we're facing of both biodiversity loss and climate change. We, as an organization, we do this through knowledge-based advocacy as well as public education. So we have a school program that we run throughout the school months, as well as doing summer activities at national parks and provincial parks across the province, as well as collaboration with others. And we seek to do this in a way that respects the sovereignty and leadership of Indigenous nations. The New Brunswick Chapter has been active since 2004, and we've led campaigns that have allowed us to reach 10% of the province in protected areas. Our head office in New Brunswick is in Fredericton, and I work out of my home office in the metropolis of Murray Corner. And as Jeff said, I've lived in the area for since 2006 when I moved here to go to Van Allison. So the Chignecto Isthmus, you're all familiar with this narrow strip of land that connects New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. It's just 24 kilometers across at its narrowest point, and it contains large, regionally significant freshwater system, as well as forested upland, and then we also have the two distinct coasts. The name Chignecto, many of you will already know this, but I think it's really nice to reflect on the history of the name. It's a European adaptation of the Mi'kmaq term for a much larger region, Sikniktewaq, which means the drainage place that extends from the Cobequid Highlands to the eastern edge of the Williston or the St. John River drainage area, and also north to the Bay of Chaleur. So the isthmus is at the center of this district, is a really resource-rich marshland traversed by rivers and portage routes that link the Bay of Fundy to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Sorry, I just was having a bit of trouble with my notes. I'm just going to try and see. No, can't get it. But that's okay. So my organization has been working with a number of other partners in this area, partners from the NGO community, so the non-governmental organization community, from government, from across both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and we've been kind of teaming up our efforts to expand our conservation efforts in this region, both on Crown land and on private land. And so I'll tell you a little bit about our efforts in the area. As many of you may know, much of the isthmus is forested. However, it's a largely fragmented landscape. So there's relatively few areas of intact habitat that's not divided or separated by roads or housing or fields or recent areas of cut forest or plantations or other land uses. And so these human impacts act as obstacles and barriers to movement of wildlife. But more intact and mature forest on the isthmus would allow for species to really thrive into the future. The area is well known for its wetlands, and they certainly are plentiful. We have the vast Tantramar marshes. We also have carbon-rich peatlands, more inland on the isthmus, as well as vibrant coastal marshes. However, the Inner Bay of Fundy has lost as much as 85% of the historical area of coastal salt marsh since European settlement. And there is a concern that continued development pressures will result in further loss in the area. So the rapid growing communities of Greater Moncton, as well as Chignectewaq, have the potential to pinch off some of the natural connections that exist here, and as well as marshland habitat. This area is also a really important bird area and attracts a wide variety of birds each year, and is a part of what's known as the Atlantic Flyway. In addition to the bird species, the isthmus is known to host 45 federal and provincial species at risk. So, wildlife crossroads to find suitable habitat for food and to raise their young. And the reason why this area is such an important wildlife corridor or wildlife connection is because we're actually the only connecting point connecting Nova Scotia to continental North America. And so that's why we consider it such an important area for conservation. And within the isthmus, there are two major areas on the isthmus where wildlife must cross some of the major highways to pass through the region. And that's between Moncton and Chignectewaq, and along the highway from Allac to Cape Germain. So there's only small sections along those major routes where the forest goes right up to the road. And these are areas that are really what we call pinch points. So areas that are really needed and are a priority area for conservation. So the collaborative that I'm involved with, CPAWS and other organizations, we're working to find ways to make the roads safer for both the wildlife that are crossing, but then also for people that are traveling in the area. So we're talking to the Planning Commission about how about wildlife underpasses or overpasses, or having better signage so that people know when they're in these areas. A few areas on and beside the isthmus are already protected for conservation, which is really great. And these areas act as what we call natural anchors for connectivity. So on the New Brunswick side, just past Moncton, there's the Canaan Bog Protected Natural Area, and that's just in the northwest of Moncton. And then there's also this Chignecto Game Sanctuary in Nova Scotia to the southwest. So those are sort of our areas, our boundary areas. And then my organization, CPAWS, work closely with the Cumberland Wilderness Society to have increased protection for some of the crown land or public land on the isthmus. There's the Chignecto Isthmus Wilderness Area on the Nova Scotia side, which also includes protection for the drinking water supply for the town of Amherst. On the New Brunswick side, we also have the Tintramar National Wildlife Area. So these areas have been already conserved and protected, though we're looking to find ways that more land can be protected, as there's a lot less crown land, especially on the New Brunswick side. There's a lot more private parcels or municipal land that we'd like to see some of our conservation efforts integrated into the planning for those areas. And that's where we end up here. So what needs to happen next? Well, we see a real opportunity where by 2027, regional service commissions in New Brunswick are working to develop or revise local land use plans, and for one of the first times they're actually developing regional land use plans. And the Southeast is one of the areas that's being worked on first. And so we see this as an opportunity that objectives that support conservation of species at risk and landscape connectivity, as well as Mi'kmaq cultural values, could be included in some of the land use planning for the region. We've have had some encouraging talks with staff from the Planning Commission already, and so we're looking forward to further conversations and seeing what can be done. Just to some key areas that our group has been really focusing on. We're lucky in this area to have such areas that work to mitigate climate change by absorbing CO2 or storing carbon in the habitats like the peatlands that we have in this area. So some of these areas are areas that we see that really need to be protected. We also do have some older and intact forests, which clean air, they have clean water, they have also absorb and store carbon, and act as natural cooling areas. They also are really important areas for socially and culturally, and we use them a lot for recreation, so maintaining these areas is really important. We also have coastal eelgrass and salt marshes, and some of these ecosystems are believed to be some of the most carbon-dense ecosystems on Earth, and they help buffer us from storm surges, which we're increasingly seeing is going to have an impact in this area. So what needs to happen next? Well, as I mentioned, for land use planning, what we see as a really important option and a step in the right direction would be having some areas zoned strictly for conservation, in order to protect some of the key linkages that our organization and others that we are working with have identified in the area. On private lands, it means more looking at how we're stewarding the forests or our properties that we have, whether it's forest land or agricultural land, and managing those properties with wildlife and the habitats that are on our properties in mind, keeping those into consideration. And I do have some brochures with me that have some of those ideas in mind about private forest land conservation. So after the talk, you can feel free to come up and get those. We also, being an organization that is a really strong advocate for conservation, we think that public awareness is a key piece here. I think that the more people living in the area, like yourselves, that understand the link and the relationship between ecological connectivity and how it relates to some of the regional priorities that we have, like climate change resilience, like tourism, like recreation. And we see this as really being a really key piece. In addition to that, we do feel that the municipalities and the Planning Commission are key players in this, and that including connectivity conservation as a goal in the regional plans and using zoning that prevents the further fragmentation of natural areas would be a really positive step forward. And we have seen precedents of this type of planning done in other areas, even in Maine, for example. They're kind of ahead of the game when it comes to being able to look at the municipalities and seeing what areas they would like to protect within the municipality. So yeah, there's some good examples that we're not starting new here. And yeah, just that public awareness piece. We'd like more people to speak up in support of conserving wildlife corridors. We need people to get involved in the planning process by reaching out to decision makers at the local service commissions or when consultations come up about the regional land use plan, which they will. Or if you sign up for our email list, I can let you know when to get involved. Protecting these key habitats can really help to keep nature intact, robust, and resilient. So to the best extent possible, as the climate changes, the more we lessen the threats we're throwing at nature from all sides, the better chance it will have to heal itself and help protect our life support systems. Because really we do rely on so much on the habitats that surround us. And so just to wrap up, some key takeaways. So number one, just this idea of connectivity and the importance of maintaining and building a strong network of resilient lands in the corridor region, and how we, especially if we're landowners, do have a role in that. And then number two, climate change resilience, recognizing that this is such an important wildlife corridor. We understand that it's an important wildlife corridor for people as well, and it's been in the news a lot. What are we going to do about the infrastructure? But I'd really love to get into the public discourse how much of an important wildlife corridor it is as well, and the importance of protecting some of the key habitats like the forest, the fresh and the salt water, and wetlands and rivers. And then the third one is community resilience and the role of land use planning in conserving some of these key areas, as well as private land stewardship. So this project is partly funded, the work that we've been doing in this area is part of environment climate change funding for community nominated priority place. And these are some of our partners, not all, but just some of the partners that are involved in this initiative. Birds Canada, CPAWS, Community Forest International, Ducks Unlimited, the Interbay of Fundy Salmon Partnership, and Amalagog Fort Folly First Nation, and Nature Conservancy, the governments of Canada, of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And so that's it for me. I'm happy to take any questions, and also have an email sign up sheet and some fact sheets. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I'm a member of Cumberland Wilderness, and we formed in 2005 when they were going to delist the Chignecto Game Sanctuary. And we're about 20 people, and we worked very hard for 7 years to get the sanctuary protected. They were going to delist it. It was the only protection in the game sanctuary in 2005 was there was a prohibition on trapping fur bearers and hunting game animals, but there was really no protection with regard to development logging. There was interest in fracking there. We worked with CPAWS. CPAWS was a partner. It took a lot of public awareness, just to emphasize what you're saying. We were in the newspapers frequently, and we were successful finally in protecting 25,000 hectares, as well as several thousand, that's in the interior of the peninsula, but also several thousand hectares along the coast. All background. We're still active. We're still very active on the Nova Scotia side, getting parcels of land set aside. I want to share with the group what happened at the end of the last meeting. I left here about 9 o'clock, and I was on my way home to Chignecto from Chignectewaq, and got stuck in a traffic jam. And I was there for about 45 minutes. And what had happened was that a bear had been struck. There was just one or two cars ahead of me. It could have been me. We had to wait until the bear was destroyed. And it happened, I don't think coincidentally, but it happened very close to the pipeline throughway, which we know on the Nova Scotia side is being used by wildlife. Why would they not use it? It's much better than beating your way through a tough landscape. So the reason I bring this up is that I think it's really important that we look at this question of either an overpass or an underpass for wildlife, and have it in the area that of the pipeline, which is, I think, what wildlife are using.
You mean the natural gas?
Yeah, the natural gas of the Sable Island.
Yeah, you're the.
We see.
It might have been the same incident, but you're
Yeah.
the second person that I've heard of in the past month or so that has mentioned that a bear is striking a bear specifically.
Yeah, the thing that I want to just share generally. I mean, we started this effort. Cumberland Wilderness started this effort, 20 years ago. There were only about 20 of us, and one of our members is here, Vicki Jellett. And I think a lot of people thought we wouldn't be successful because we were such a small group. We're still together, and what I think we learned from that experience, we partnered with CPAWS, we partnered with other NGOs. We were constantly in government's face. We met with ministers. It was just a really full-on effort. But a small group, a group this size, can actually be successful when you're persistent, when you just don't let the issue lag or disappear. So anyway, I think it's great the work you're doing. We're still working on it on the Nova Scotia side.
I'm wondering if you partner or coordinate in any way with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, who have many of the same goals as you do, and they have acquired, either through purchase or other arrangements, 10 to 12 properties between Jollycure, Halls Hill, and the pipeline. One of the properties is adjacent to the pipeline in New Brunswick, and of course that's primarily as a wildlife corridor. And one of the primary purposes was a corridor for the moose, because I don't think they're endangered, but they're at risk in Nova Scotia, and they want to maintain a strong gene pool. So many of their goals sound very similar to yours, and they're acquiring property to maintain a corridor. And I'm wondering if you in any way work with the Nature Conservancy.
Yes, we do work quite closely with them, and they're one of the partners in this collaborative of organizations that have been working together under one specific funding program for the past few years, where we've been trying to figure out exactly the areas that we want to see protected, and the benefits of having this partnership is that we have an organization like mine, which is more advocating for Crown land protection, and then we have the Nature Conservancy, which focuses more on private land protection, and then we also are working with Emerald Folly, because they're working on Indigenous conserved and protected areas. So we sort of have trying to cover all the bases. And in this partnership too, there are government staff from both Department of Natural Resources on the New Brunswick side and the equivalent on the Nova Scotia side. So I think we've got everyone that needs to be at the table in some ways, like a part of this collaborative. But yeah, I definitely think that to your point over there, that just the need to be speaking up and going to our representatives' doors, our political representatives' doors, to be expressing the importance of protecting these areas, and the importance of things like wildlife crossings, which, you know, I know that the first response is going to be, it's too expensive. Well, when people are riding off their cars and killing bears and moose and deer and coyotes
And people.
and
Yeah,
people,
people.
you know, what's the price on that? And so, yeah, I think it's been a really great initiative that we've had this collaborative people working together from all these different organizations, because for so long we can, like many different sectors, can work in silos, but it's been a positive thing that we're all kind of working together, recognizing that we have the same goals.
You know, just sort of following up on that a bit, because you've spoken now about basically two main obstacles to the corridor, the highway from Moncton to Chignecto and the highway from Olac out to the Northumberland Strait. And, you know, that it's recognized that there has to be some way of getting past those. Has anybody come forward with a practical, feasible way of, or proposal for ensuring a wildlife corridor that would adequately get past those two highway barriers?
Not in the way of like moving the highway, but just implementing some sort of path crossing.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Has anybody, you know, developed a pragmatic, practical sort of proposal for that, whether it be, you know, a highway overpass large enough over wild enough country that wildlife would recognize it as a place that they could get under the road, or something of this sort?
Not to my knowledge. What has been done is they've studied exactly where the animals are crossing. So they have all these maps of all of the different species. So they can take that to the Department of Transportation and basically say, here, you need to build something here. And our Department of Transportation in New Brunswick knows how to build underpasses. If you drive to Fredericton, you see them. There's not that many of them, but the technology is there. So as far as I know, there hasn't been a particular proposal of that kind.
Any suggestions to reduce the speed limit in those specific spots with
I
flashing lights and so on, and enforcement?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Has that ever been proposed?
I'm not sure. I mean,
It would help build awareness, is what I'm thinking, because we live in this area, so we all know where the danger spots are for the most part if you travel that way regularly. But tourists and so on, people from away, as we say, wouldn't be aware. There might be a little sign about a moose, and, oh, that's cute, and they just keep, you know, they're not going, oh, where's the moose? They're not that aware, but a lower speed limit, because, you know, signage might be worth a shot just to build awareness.
Yeah, and definitely a good interim suggestion, a good interim option.
Until they build the underpass.
Yeah.
My comment was the same about the overpass or underpass, because it seems to me that protecting on either side of it is great, but if you don't have that way for them to cross, you have that barrier that is just an obstacle.
That's right.
So who works with who to try and get that to happen? Is your group, is that something that you would look at, working with the government? You know, how do you make that happen?
Yeah, definitely my organization and the others that we work with, we could meet with the Department of Transportation, and we could also meet with the Department of Natural Resources about it. I did happen to be in a meeting with the Minister of Transportation and just took the opportunity to mention it. because he definitely seemed interested in some of the issues that we were bringing forward. Not, it wasn't really not specific about to this project, but because I had his ear, I mentioned it, and I sent him some of the studies that I was aware of, just the studies that showed the pinch points. But definitely it would be our groups, but I think, you know, it needs to also come from people that live in the area. Yeah.
Public.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of financial cost would be to do something? Probably a tunnel would be ideal, like a 12-foot tunnel or something.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cost involved?
I'm not sure if the cost.
Why couldn't we, all these groups could have a fundraiser, why not? And even when the pipeline was put in, why couldn't something have been done at the time? I'm sure there was a lot of talk then when this pipeline went in.
Yeah, it's possible. I wasn't involved in any conversations at that time about that.
Sorry to take up so much time, but I just wanted to pick up on what Bruce said. In fact, moose are endangered in Nova Scotia. They're not just at risk or threatened, they're endangered. The reason we advocated for Chignecto Game Sanctuary to be set aside, it's one of the few known areas where there's a remnant population of moose in Nova Scotia. The question of advocacy is really important, and you know, working with NGOs like yourself, that's vital, but politicians need to hear from citizens. And I think that's why we were effective. And, you know, we were persistent. We were very clear that our goals were different than the government's. The government did not want to protect the game sanctuary. They wanted to remove all protection from the game sanctuary. And, you know, we were persistent in making our point, but respectfully. And ultimately what happened, we would meet with the local politicians, we would meet with the federal politicians, we would meet with the ministers, I mean, as citizens, not as a, you know, and ultimately there were people coming out within the departments on our side and starting to work background with us. But it would take a group like this to dedicate themselves to it over however long a period it would take. So I would strongly suggest that this would be a very credible group and could be a very effective advocate for the work you're doing.
I drive the school bus, and now is the period when we take the kids and bring down to the marsh or even the nature all over the place. And I was wondering if we could inform the teachers to explain to the kids what we are talking tonight. It would be like a beginning for the kids at 10 years old or even older, that when they walk down the woods, instead of just looking at the trees and the bushes, they try to be aware of what's happening, the situation, and what can destroy what they see, and what can be done to protect. So I think it would be a good thing to talk to the teacher, to introduce them in what we are talking tonight. And when we bring the kids outside, instead of just to keep running, no, just look at something and you know what's happening. So they get informed at an early age in the age they have, right? So they can somehow talk later as we are talking tonight.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. We definitely have to start early, and our organization does do some school programs, but more in the Fredericton area, because that's where our main office is. There are other groups that do some of this kind of work more in this area. But yeah, I think that the more curriculum, I'm not sure what the right word is, maybe the teachers in the room could help me out, but if you have information that kind of hits on some of the curriculum notes, then that can be incorporated, especially if schools like Port Elgin where you have the like outdoor classroom and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to bring the message you were talking tonight, to bring to the class and inform these kids about everything we are talking, to make them responsible that when you see a tree or a stone or a bush, that's what's happening behind, so let's be careful about it.
The money that's coming to this region with tide mitigation and things like that along the Nova Scotia, New Brunswick corridor here, it seems like this is kind of tangentially appropriate that you could ask for infrastructure development because it is sort of within the tidal reach of the area historically, that a game corridor or any sort of big project like that could be tied into whatever money is being asked of the two provinces and the federal government. Does that make any sense?
Could you explain a little bit more what you mean about
So
the tide?
they're going to be spending, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars between here and Amherst and elsewhere, building up dikes and things like that. A large pool of money is coming, and so wildlife has to be somehow considered within this. And so even though it's up the road, it could be something that the two provinces and the feds would consider, because it is largely all part of this organism, that exists out there. How does one start that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We've my organization and other conservation organizations have been invited to different engagement sessions of the Chignecto Resiliency Project, which is the name for the partnership that's happening between Brunswick and Nova Scotia for the infrastructure project that's going to be happening on the dikes. Because we've been really calling on the need to include nature-based climate solutions in that conversation, not just raise the dikes with hard infrastructure, but to recognize that we live in this very marshland ecosystem and where we have all of these habitats that actually have a role to play in being a storm surge, being a buffer for some of the impacts of the storm, recognizing that something needs to happen, but that we also have to, whatever infrastructure is going to be built needs to also take into consideration the marshland and the many species that use the area. So I'm not really sure what it looks like in terms of funding for projects across the isthmus. One thing though that we did learn at that meeting is that the emergency route that has been identified for like an alternate route to going across the highway to Amherst is the road that we're talking about, over towards Cape Germain and then up to Mountain on the 15th. And so I posed the question at that meeting, this road is not really cannot be a heavy traffic route, not necessarily the Trans-Canada Highway, but the 15 and along Route 955, which if you've traveled it recently, is not meant to be a high traffic road. So I think that it would be nice to be able to incorporate this kind of discussion into what's happening on this corridor. Yes, so in the back.
Who were the change agents that created the fences and the underpasses between Moncton and Fredericton? Because there are quite a few of them, and somebody had to do that. So was this a governmental impetus, or was it from do you know who created that? Because somebody had to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the history of that. That would be a good thing to look into, if it came from community members speaking out, or if it was more of a recognition of.
Because it was only about, 15 years ago that section was built.
I'm not sure.
If I recall correctly, it took quite a number of traffic deaths.
Okay.
So there was a public
More deer.
awareness and outcry demanding from their MLAs,
Okay.
Yeah.
because it is like.
Because they just put fences.
It is.
Yeah.
Every animal.
It was provincial.
Yeah, the lady in the front row here said that it was most likely public outcry because there had been a number of deaths on the road, of human deaths. Yes.
I was just thinking about Peter's question and currently, so you started talking about priority places, and so there's a lot of funding into conservation planning for this collaborative, but there's also the Inner Bay of funding, conservation planning, and one of the target areas is the Chignecto Isthmus, and you also have a priority place project that involves all the partners, conservation planning since 2018, 2019. And so that's a lot of funding, identifying 45 species at risk in those areas, and all of that conservation planning has been going on for an extended period of time, going back to 2006 for this Chignecto Isthmus. And it just seems that it's time, because of the resiliency project, that it's a bigger collaboration, like the municipalities, like in these conservation plans, it's always addressed that, oh, we need to be talking with the municipalities or going to the schools, but I don't know, there really needs to be a public awareness campaign that's collaborative. So 2 weeks ago, I was on Prince Edward Island at a workshop, and there was a gentleman there from Vermont, and he walked into the room with a Moose Sex t-shirt on, and it was so exciting, and he wore that, and he's from the Quebec Labrador Foundation, but he was there talking about the Stay Connected initiative, so a much broader connectivity project than just the Chignecto Isthmus. But he wore that Moose Sex t-shirt because it was such a great campaign. It went viral, and it reached Japan. And I've been in those conservation meetings, when members of the Chignecto Wilderness Society, like Dick, has talked about this pipeline, pinch line, and we're still like nowhere close to making it a change. So yeah, it's just, so there's a lot of money going into research and into planning, but it's time, now's the time to really do that campaigning. And like we did Chignecto Isthmus programs at the Sackville School with Nature Conservancy of Canada before, so everybody's done small little projects, but that broader Staying Connected initiative is what I learned from that man from Vermont is we are all connected, and if we put our efforts together, and really maybe, and another, I'm kind of all over the place, but eels came up a lot. So moose definitely they're endangered, they're important, but maybe there's another species to that we can all get together on with conservation groups from a much broader area to really campaign for some change in this time of need and opportunity. Because please God, they're gonna stop researching the Chignecto Isthmus and actually do something. Because with the amount of research that I can just calculate in my head over a period of 10 years, we're talking tens of millions of dollars. And
That's where you need to get the government. You
Yeah.
have to lobby the government and get them on board, provincial, federal, both
Yeah.
provinces.
And they seem to be, but like in all these pockets. And just like the provinces fighting over who's gonna pay for the work that needs to be done on the isthmus, everybody has a say. So anyway, I'm sorry to ramble on.
No, that's
It's
okay.
very,
I also think that the time is now. I see the opportunity with the regional land use plans. It doesn't address the point of this pinch point of, where the animals are crossing between Olac and Cape Germain, that I think that could be incorporated into it, but I see the opportunity with the regional land use plans to be able to make some to zone some areas as conservation, so that they are habitat that are protected, because there's a lot of municipal lands that, like even in Sackville, that we're using right now as if they were protected areas, like where the beautiful ski trails that we have and that by our drinking water supply, and that's municipal land, but it's not protected. So things could change in the future where we get a new municipal government that says, actually, we don't need those ski trails for skiing. We'd actually want to just cut down all of the trees because there are tariffs, and we'd rather, anyway, just, but
Makes sense.
I think that there's opportunities to protect areas on the isthmus through the regional land use planning. And then the transportation thing, I think it's a matter of organizations like ours going and talking to the Department of Transportation, writing a letter to the Minister of Transportation, for at least for those couple of key areas, and to your point about signage, I think, and reducing speed limits in some of these areas. I think that there are practical things that we can do, and I agree that it's time to move on it.
I love the idea of the t-shirts. Whoever did that marketing campaign really knew their stuff.
I still have mine. It's
We could have billboards that say Nova Scotia moose are lonely. People would take an interest, right?
It was Nature Conservancy of Canada that did that.
And Melanie, I was thinking about those local service planning commissions and they can use existing data. The problem is getting another group is like more data, like the wild paths, like Nature Conservancy of Canada work with universities to a whole summer they mapped through iNaturalist all the roadkill, like on these pinch points and on the highway. And then I think Nature Conservancy of Canada also did a session at Beaubassin where people, hunters, land users came in and talked about, because Nature Conservancy of Canada did the profiling of how the animals use the isthmus, but then there was a practical study of how people were seeing the animals, so all that data is there. So if that commission can use that existing data, it's enough, it really is enough. Then we could, they could bring it to the next step instead of, spending another 2-3 years making a plan, collecting data before decisions are made.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And we are making good progress. I worked with the Nature Conservancy this spring, and worked with the Planning Commission, had a number of calls and made sure that they had all of that data, as well as all of the protected, they knew where all of the protected areas that exist on the isthmus. It's more thinking of the New Brunswick side for this exercise, because it's regional land use planning on the New Brunswick side. But so, yeah, they've got that data, and yeah, so we'll see what happens. you know, with all of these kinds of things, we know that there could potentially be pushback from industry looking to develop in the area, and also with, as I was mentioning earlier, the pressure from our growing cities and spreading further along the coastline and along the Bay of Fundy as well. So, yeah.
That study that Carrie Lee mentioned on roadkill, I think was done by a graduate student at Dalhousie University, and there's a lot of data collected, and I'm sure it's available.
So I know.
Gentleman back there, the school bus driver, he was saying about children in schools, there should be more information. Well, when they had like the waste stuff and all that, kids really learn from it. They learn from school. Their parents didn't teach them. It was the school they got it, you know. So it would be the same thing. If they were aware of what's in that forest that they could destroy by walking over it, you'd see quite the difference. And they're our future.
Any last question? No?
Well,
This could go on forever.
Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
I'm just going to stop this if I can figure out how.